You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. And this week we have part 3 of 3.
Correct.
In our cEDH review. And we're going to start off with something we kind of touched on last episode, where we said there was a glaringly obvious group of cards that see play in EDH that we did not include. So we're going to start off with those and why we didn't include them. So with that, let's get it taken away.
So the first I have here on our list is a pair of cards, and they are the free spells from Commander 2020, Fierce Guardianship, and Deflecting Swat. And when we were going through the list originally, and you look at the Moxfield list that we've linked over the past couple of weeks, while they're not the most expensive cards in their category, they do kind of represent this idea that they are meant for a more aggressive form of Commander. They are free spells, counter spell, and a redirect in their own right. And from here, the conversation of, well, what does this grouping of spells really mean? And like I said, this kind of movement away from Commander on the whole to something a little more aggressive. So what's keeping the price up on Fierce Guardianship? You know, why does a card that has no reprints outside of Commander Masters still see a $40 price tag? And it's going to be because it's still extremely good in Commander as well as cEDH, a format that
Everywhere.
is basically respond or die.
Yeah.
That is the card. It is a free counter, which generally is performant in the format, but also performant at riling people up when you're just playing a casual game, especially because the requirement on this is so small. Just have your commander or have 3 mana. Very easy to attain. Deflecting Swat, similarly, 2 and a red for a redirect. So it basically just chooses new targets for a spell or ability, and that last little bit is kind of important because you can just kind of redirect some onboard shenanigans as necessary. And again, this is a card that has an almost $40 price tag with just the Commander Masters reprints, and it was close to, I think, it hit almost 70. Deflecting Swat did before the reprint, as did Fierce Guardianship. And this is a cycle, and it seems like nobody cares about the other 3 parts of the cycle. The green card is a fog, which is fine, but it's not, consuming mists? Constant mists.
Constant mist, yeah.
Fog with buyback, where you just keep sacking a land. So it just goes, it doesn't go infinite, but with a Crucible style effect, you can just keep fogging the board. Like, nobody really cares about the fog. They care about the counterspell, and they care about the redirect, because that kind of de-incentivizes some people from engaging with the game in a way they really want to, where they just want to kind of do their thing and not have to be interacted with. And these spells rub up against that. And when you take a look at the price graphs, it's very difficult to see what's going on, but you can see compared to the Bitcoin and Ethereum graphs that this doesn't really line up with them. It just kind of lines up with Commander getting extremely popular. There is a really big spike around Ikoria for both of these cards, and then it settles back down to almost exactly where it was prior to Ikoria, which is right around when we saw movement on all the other cards we've talked about, especially last week, where Commander at Home really became a thing. These cards hit in that era of Commander at Home, so they already started with this big push behind them. So what we see is just, and I'll bring up the Guardianship graph, it's just a stepwise graph. It's like maybe like a year or 18 months, it picks up, then another 18 months, it picks up. Then it spikes real hard at Dominaria. Then it drops back down to what it was before. So we can consider kind of that like anomalous. Then reprint happens, it tanks, and now it's coming back up because this card is extremely popular. It is an easy to find and acquire free spell for cEDH. And if you're to take a look on Rec, you're going to see that these cards are being played there as well in very high numbers, but they are not cards you're going to see at every casual table, but you will see in every cEDH pod in quantity. It might not be 4x. You might have somebody on Blue Farm, so obviously they're not going to be playing Deflecting Swat, but chances are you're going to see one or both of these in most decks in a cEDH pod, not at a Commander pod.
Yeah, and these are kind of interesting because they do have prevalence in casual EDH because of the recency with which they were printed and the fact that they were printed in such high print runs. But it doesn't have the same level. Like I guess when I say casual EDH, where I would expect to see these is actually in like your 75% pods, where you're kind of inching towards competitive. You're kind of getting there, but you just want to do big, dumb, swingy things, and you still put it in there. And I think that anecdotally, something that I've seen, locally at events and stuff, is that your EDH areas are starting to get closer to the floor being a 75%. And as that happens, that's when I would expect these cards to really kick off.
Absolutely.
As more and more people dump that casual aside and go for the 75% battle cruiser stuff.
Yep, agreed. Now, I do want to head off those people that are screaming, but your first bullet point in how you were running this was to not look at supplemental products. These two cards came up immediately because they are cornerstones of the cEDH format, and they were super important to Commander at that point in time. They are not as warping as Dockside, which has basically become just
format defining.
Yeah,
it's just you expected it every table,
and the villain of every Commander game, right? These cards
it out of the game. Wait, God,
yeah, you went infinite with Dockside, whatever. These cards kind of represent the best of the best in that for supplementals they are not as egregious as Dockside. They're easily approachable and easily extended into regular Commander, but it's hard to imagine cEDH finance without these two cards, like in particular. Dockside just goes fucking everywhere. It's insane. Like if you could honestly play that card in Vintage and not get laughed at, I'm sure people would. And I'm sure they've tested with it.
Oh, absolutely. Someone has.
Yeah.
No way they haven't.
But moving past that, we're going to get to the rest of the cards. And the first one I would hope most people realize was left off our list of instants pretty quickly, and that's Vamp Tutor. We're looking at the Vamp Tutor from 6th edition because that is the newest printing. This was a constructed all-star. It's banned in Legacy. I played this in Extended when I could. And when we take a look at it's restricted in Vintage. It's a mandatory piece of cEDH now. It was super useful in Commander. And when we take a look at the stocks graph, we see like, oh, this is a cute $20 or $30 card. Yes, it was. And that was what regular Commander Finance did to this card. But when we got to start playing Commander at home in Ikoria, I'll bring the stocks graph up again because it's kind of funny. It's like a slow uptick towards 50, and then it just like runs up to 60 and 100 through reprints. Like people just ate up this card. Supply drained by cEDH and casual Commander players alike. This was kind of that stimulus check era movement when you look at those spikes in sales according to market. And this kind of card basically represents, I think, the best of cEDH and what could possibly be deemed as like the worst of regular Commander for what it does. Not it's a bad card, but this is like, if your deck can play Vampiric Tutor, should it? Yes. Is it a little too powerful for most of your like 50% pods? Yeah, probably. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Yeah. Look, like when I started playing this format in 2011, did I put this in my Dromar deck, which is just a hard Esper control deck? Yes, I did, because of what it does. I'm drawing infinite cards, so yeah, I'll put one on the top. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this card is now effectively just driven by cEDH, the format. It is, again, too powerful for regular Commander. The demand is sated by both sides of the coin, but at the end of the day, casting this at a regular table is a little damning. You might get some sideways eyes when you're doing this, but the graph that we see is attached to cEDH movement, the popularity of that format rising, and this is a card that is everywhere in that format. Similar to the next instant that I assume people noted was missing from our list in Mono Drain. And Mono Drain, this is weird because it's been reprinted like 4 times in supplementals, but we're really just looking at the Legends version, sadly, which has the price premium of being from Legends, but it is the most representative thing we really have here. But when we take a look at this like rope, this frozen rope of a graph into Ikoria, again see Commander at Home really picks up. The regular EDH format is not really driving this card. It is forever it was like a $60 to $80 card, because at one point in time it was one of the best spells to play in Vintage, and it stopped that and remained like $100 card in Infinitum, and it just existed as such until we hit the Commander at Home Revolution, and now it just kind of has a $2 price tag because of rarity, just being a Legends card, and all the printings that we get hover somewhere between, I'd say, like not Outlaws, but like $45 to $80, depending if it's full art or not. And this is an extremely powerful counter spell. For counter spells that you have to pay mana for, it is not the most powerful, but it is one of the most powerful. It's Arcane Denial. Is that the colorless and a blue? You draw a card, the owner of the spell draws 2. You don't know what Arcane Denial does?
Oh, no, I do.
Am I right about that? Is that what?
Yeah, that is. It's next upkeep, not their next upkeep. The next upkeep.
Yeah,
they draw 2, you draw 1.
Yeah, that is like the most powerful counterspell in Commander, because it doesn't cost double blue, it costs a color and a blue. Drain is just, I think, like the next best counterspell where you have to pay money for, or not money, mana for
well,
it.
You do.
That's true. And this is another card that's being driven by cEDH, because as we can see from this price graph, this card has been legal in the format since before its inception. It had done nothing because of it. It did not get any more popular or any less popular in EDH, and is only really being pushed by cEDHers, and starting with like the Commander at Home, effectively Revolution. And if we take a look at the Iconic Masters graph, this is the first reprinting. Of course, it starts ridiculously high because it's the first time we've had Mono Drain printed since the 90s. It
20
immediately
years,
tanks. Yeah, it immediately tanks down to $60, but well, like half the price of Legends copy. People gobble up as many as they can, and it just troughs for so long, and then it stagnates for, let's see, this is 2019. Yeah, about a year and a half until Commander at Home picks up, and then it's reprinted, and then it just craters out. But again, it's Commander at Home. This is when cEDH really picks up. People weren't just buying Mono Drains at home to play Commander with the same group of people they've been playing with forever. If that had been the case, then this wouldn't have tanked immediately after release. It would have been floated by that. Instead, nope, straight to the bottom, directly to jail.
I think one of the interesting things about a lot of these instances too, and this is something that, if we adjusted the parameters a little bit, we may have come with wildly different conclusions, is that for a lot of people, I think, like we said, these were driven by cEDH. Vision's Vampiric Tutor was not ending up in your 75% list. A lot of people, as these reprints hit, it was, oh, I've wanted a mana drain for my deck for a while. Let me pick one up now that it's affordable again.
Yeah.
And then gradually, as EDH at home, by which we do not mean we have EDH at home, we literally mean people playing EDH at home. When that starts taking off, you see it. And what happens is, or what I've seen locally, is all of a sudden now people are getting these that aren't competitive EDH players, that have mana drain in their deck because they treated themselves to it, that have a Vampiric Tutor because they treated themselves to it. And that actually, in a lot of cases, I feel like has pushed them towards competitive EDH. Mm-hmm. And then again, it goes back into the feedback of these cards are being driven by and large by cEDH, not because, your 75%ers are getting these cards when they're affordable, which they are, but they're typically not staying 75%ers after that.
Yeah.
They're going after the higher, more valuable things. And anecdotally, as all of this was happening, I specifically remember Mana Drain, and you may as well, floating infinite Japanese buy lists. Because all of a sudden, EDH started taking off in Japan. And you know what they don't do with card games in Japan? Play casually. It's just competitive.
Yep.
So when you see these things floated on Japanese buy lists, that reinforces this belief and this evidence that competitive EDH is what is driving these things.
Yep.
When you have your Iconic Masters reprints of Vamp, Mana Drain, Mana Crypt, that kind of stuff floated over to Japan, it's because their competitive EDH players are playing them, because they're not playing in Legacy or Vintage.
No. Yeah.
It's cEDH.
I like the reminder that, like, people were treating themselves to these cards. They still do. We don't have to be seeing stimulus checks to this. You could just save up and treat yourself for it, right?
Yeah.
But you don't treat yourself to this card and stay a 75%er. You get the next thing. You save up for the next thing that helps your deck become more consistent, more powerful, and you go up and up and up. And all of a sudden now you are competing at a competitive EDH level. You have become a cEDH player, and it's very hard to walk that back without having those cards in your collection. So that is a good story to tell. The next two cards are the sorceries we missed. And the first one, I assume nobody's going to get this one. They'll think about the second one, is Wheel of Fortune. And Wheel of Fortune for me is this really funny card that has played this kind of interesting role in my life. For me, this card is forever like $5. And looking at the stocks graph, you're like, that couldn't possibly be. That card's got to be like $100 some odd for forever, just based on that random spike of the revised version up to $1,000. So it really kind of diffuses what's going on. You would be incorrect, because up until 2017, the card had not broken $100.
Yep.
For the first, 6 years of stocks, it starts out at $9, and it is $9 for the beginning of Commander. Commander starts to ramp up through 2014. We get the monocolor decks 2015, 2016. It's a $20 card. 2017, we start seeing some RL float. It goes up to $45. And by the time we hit like 2018, it's now a $90 card, and it's taking off. And for me, it's just one of those things where we talked about the last card in the list a couple of weeks ago, and you're like, I couldn't believe it was this price. And I had to honestly question you. I'm like, there's no fucking way. Yeah. Sure enough, it is, because these cards just have this, like, there's just it's not a block. I've just owned the quantity that I've wanted for such a long time. I don't care to.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Like, I don't need to know the price. So why would I know the price?
Yep. I'm playing casually at home. Wheel of Fortune affects everybody. It's ridiculously cheap to buy. So of course I have my copies already. Wheel of Fortune, now to actually extrapolate and talk on this a little bit. This is an old vintage staple, hugely powerful, is restricted. Everybody played one alongside Twister. It moved into old school. It is a cornerstone of I like to call it Oops Old Wheels deck, which is just the Grixis, the Twister deck with Underworld Dreams. If I had the opportunity to play old school, that would be the deck that I play. And after that, it just kind of became this like Commander, not quite a throwaway card, but like an always throw in card when you're playing Red. We didn't have a lot of impulse draws. We just had a lot of like draw, discard stuff. Draw 2, discard 1.
Lots of looting, lots of pillaging, but no like hard draw.
Yeah, and Wheel of Fortune was basically the card you chased when you were playing Red as your draw engine. And eventually, like we see with everything else, this card is too expensive and too powerful for Commander as we know it now. The format has just gotten too efficient for this card to remain a low power object inside this game. And so like everything else before that we've talked about, adding one into your deck can flip the switch from casual to competitive very quickly, and then you start to chase that. You start that run. Right now, Wheel is like a $300 card. It is much more expensive than most of the other cards we've talked about. For somebody to treat themselves, this is now something you have to want to add and understand what it's going to do to your deck. It very much follows, when we zoom in, the kind of Commander at home revolution, though the graph is a little bit smoother, like I said, because of this random spike up to $1,000. Some ridiculous sale happened, but the thing is, it hasn't tailed off. So like some of the other cards we were looking at, I think like Grim Monolith and Chrome Mox Diamond, these cards, they don't really tail off, or if they do, they recover very quickly. This is a long tail card in terms of price. This is a card that is going to see play in cEDH because it is criminally efficient for what it does, just like Twister before. We talked about that in the first episode. And I think this is a really good like flagship card for cEDH, even if it doesn't go in every Red deck. Yeah. This is just kind of like emblematic of what the format's doing, which is just drop all your fast mana and refuel. And that benefits you more than anybody else. If you can do this on the first like 2 turns of the game, after that, it's a little too late. Everybody has deployed, so you're now all operating at the same speed. If you're able to, if you're the first or the second person and you can do this on turns 1 or 2 without being able to deploy spells to the board, those players that kept hands to deploy a little more slowly based on their ability to do so now get mucked. Right, they're at the whim of the next 7, and that's a very powerful option for a format like cEDH. It's also why it's really powerful in cube variants with Fast Bond, when you can just deploy your hand and refill. Both players kept their opening 7 based on the context of what that hand did, and when you get to deploy a good chunk of your hand and draw up 7 more cards, you can play those cards. But your opponent who chose that starting hand, or opponents that chose that starting hand, those starting hands based on the context of that hand, might not be able to engage with the game in a meaningful way, which is a very powerful thing to do in cEDH. So it is a very dynamic resource shift when you can do this early on, and really kind of changes the context of Commander games on the whole. So it is much more powerful now than it used to be back in 2011 up through 2017. This is a card that has like the RL bump behind it. It has cEDH behind it. It has it is an iconic card to the game. This has everything going for it, just like Twister.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things you touched on there that's kind of interesting was when you mentioned things like Grim Monolith and stuff like that, and how they don't really tail off. Some of the cards that we went over do tail off. The ones that don't, I think, are the ones that are singularly unique in their impact on the game and iconography. You're never going to get another card close to Grim Monolith in terms of design. You're not. Not happening. They're not going to print a spell like Wheel of Fortune again.
They keep trying. Wheel of Misfortune came out. Valakut Awakening came out. They don't like wheels. They like winds. Yeah. Winds of Change and stuff. And like
it's
Legends.
Winds effects, or the like Jace's Archivist, where it's what was the legacy? Windfall. A wind. Yes. Winds. That's what they kind of do. So, as we'll touch on later, that's something important to look out for when paying attention to these cards is this something that is easily replaceable? Like Vamp, is there something similar in terms of cost, effectiveness, and efficiency? And that's where I think a lot of what we looked at came from.
Yep. And then, speaking of Vamp and efficiency, the last card on the list I'm hoping people have projected. It is good old Demonic Tutor.
The boy.
Now, this is a card a couple of weeks ago where you're like, I can't believe it's $50. I stopped you, and I'm like, my guy, no fucking way this is $50. This
Holy
card
shit,
is this is perpetually $5 because I'm a goddamn magic boomer. And sure enough, I looked it up because this card's been reprinted so much. The revised version, I was just
infinite.
I'm like, there's no way the revised version is $50. We have like that cool ass Mystical Archives, the Japanese promo that like is baller as hell. We got the UMA stuff. We got stuff on the list. We got Judge promos, Commander Masters, like even the 30th anniversary stuff. Like, this card just keeps getting reprinted. I thought they just finally did it. I thought they just put it in the goddamn ground. But nope, it just keeps coming back. It is the Phoenix, man. Yeah. And this is a card that, well, again, we take a look at stocks, and it just runs at, like, $15 forever. And then it's up until we start hitting some reprints. And then it does not pick up with Commander at home. The Ikoria stuff does not really do much for it. It really picks back up at Modern Horizons 2, and then just kind of like in the long run, it's probably going to average out when you do the math to probably about the market price it is now, maybe about 43, 45. And I would expect it to have this really long sine graph of price for forever. But white border copies are cool. That demon is iconic. Pentagram right middle of the forehead. I think the Strixhaven Mystical Archives art, the Japanese art, is also really iconic at this point. Like, what that card is when somebody casts it. You don't have to know anything else. That art
right away. That's what it is. Cool.
Yeah. And then they have the UMA stuff. Oh, I forgot the other one. The dual deck.
Yeah.
That's the only one that I would expect to hold a price point. I'll touch on that real quick. Alpha Beta, first two black border printings of Demonic Tutor, Divine, dual deck Divine versus Demonic Angels versus Demons, whatever you want to call it. The first non-alpha beta way to get a Black Border Demonic Tutor. Eventually, we had the Mystical Art cards, we have the foils from Ultimate Masters, etc., etc. This one holds an odd premium because of that. I don't think it'll ever really drop as low as any of the other reprints will because of the provenance on that first Black Border printing, and I don't think they've upcycled the art anywhere else for that matter. The Judge promo, nope, neither Judge promo uses
neither
it yet.
Judge promo.
It is pretty unique art, so if you have the opportunity to get those, I would recommend. But this is a card that started out as just it sat in the tutor suite. What is efficient? What is affordable? Demonic Tutor costs much less than Vampiric Tutor. Cool, slap it in there. It's not an instant, it costs 2, not 1. Easy peasy. Diabolic, cool, it goes in there. What did we talk about? Imp Seal costs way too much. They're too hard to find. Vampiric, they're too rare. Personal and Vampiric just out of bounds financially, also difficult to find. And so Demonic Tutor was not really seen as this kind of card that does a whole lot for the game. People are playing tutors all over the place. The cards we're tutoring up are really big and dumb, so we're never going to cast them anyway. Like,
yeah,
cool, I'll see you later, Tooth and Nail. Like, turn 12, cool. Eventually, maybe, who knows.
I might draw you. It's fine.
But a lot of the price corresponds to utility, like we talked about with Wheel, a little bit with Vamp as well, where what you're targeting with these tutors is not the greatest. It's just not. The way the format was. It was not efficient. It was really bad. Casually supported format. WotC hadn't really introduced anything cool, unique yet. People were still finding their way, finding their footing. And then over time, as the threats get better, as the spells get better, as the format gets juiced by WotC, Demonic Tutor becomes much more of a threat. Worldly Tutor becomes much more of a threat. Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Vamp Tutor, everything just becomes much more of a threat because the things they can target are way more powerful than they ever were. And so this becomes a card that is still, I'd imagine, acceptable at regular tables. But at this point in time, the people that are really going to be searching this thing out are probably maybe like vintage players from the year 2001 and then cEDH players, because this does exactly what it says. It costs 2, it's sorcery speed. So what? It is technically better than what's the one from Eldraine, the Monkey Paw? Not
Wishclaw Talisman.
Wishclaw Talisman. You're not going to give it away, so if your spell gets countered, it's not like you're giving away a tutor to an opponent. It just does its thing. It's easy.
Yeah.
Where I do seeing it being outmodded is like the Sisay deck doesn't need tutors because Sisay tutors, so that's wicked easy. So it's like there's the opportunity for this to even fall out of cEDH, but right now that's the only driver for this card. This is not a casual table card anymore, because while the card is inoffensive, what it gets is very offensive.
Yep.
We talk
just like Survival.
That's exactly the card I was going to compare it to, actually. I said, we talk all the time about how people hate losing to Creator of Behemoth in combat, which I do not understand. And if you're going to 2-card combo yourself off of a table, it's going to be Survival, or not Survival, Natural Order into Creator Huff. Not
Oof, there it is.
Yeah, sorry, usage Survival. I meant no. Natural Order into Creator Huff is a surefire way to get your ass uninvited to a game for whatever reason. But that's what we're talking about. It's that level. It's what follows the Demonic Tutor that people do not like that makes it more of a competitive card overall. There is a bit of a nostalgia pull, but again, it's not for the revised version. So any finance here has to be tied to the formats that are using it, and that is strictly identified as cEDH because it's just too much. It doesn't matter that this was an UMA. It's just like when they put Ancient Tomb in the format. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. That's too much for regular Commander. It is the competitive Commander that is playing this. People that crack precons to play aren't buying Demonic Tutors. They're building their own decks. They're looking to compete. They're looking to be efficient. They're looking for their decks to be reliable, and what they're trying to do be repeatable. And that moves them away from your basic EDH rec user to somebody who's a little more competitive.
Yep. Ooh. So, we've covered our group of cards that we left out, explained why we left them out. Now we've got our general takeaways from our research, methodology, etc. So, I think one of the big ones that I took away is that the relation between these cards in cEDH, and specifically the ones that have kind of gotten more to the realm of cEDH than casual, specifically with like a Vamp Tutor, where casual players picked it up, but then they started moving more and more towards competitive. I think you just have to admit that for a certain quality of card, a certain power level of card, cEDH has to be acknowledged as the driver over regular EDH.
For sure.
I'm not showing up at a regular EDH table and someone's thoracling me off the table. If they are, I want to be their friend because that's what you should be doing.
Agreed.
Because you should be trying to win as efficiently as possible, which is reserved for the realm of cEDH.
Yes, I agree. Anecdotally, I went to my LGS to play Commander for the first time since I moved, and I just plopped down at a table with 3 other guys. I took out Calamax, a deck that I just barely upgraded with like realistic lands, like the Commander Masters lands, the duels that ETB untapped. I grabbed a Cyclonic Rift and I grabbed a Mana Drain, and I upgraded the deck a little bit to the power level I wanted it to operate at. The most offensive thing that deck could do was to capsize lock the table.
That's disgustingly
casual. It is. And I'll tell you what, I played a game with those guys. I did not draw any of that overpowered stuff, but it became immediately clear that those 2 cards in particular were way too powerful for what those 3 guys were attempting to do. Like, the most powerful card they had in the list they first played were their individual Soul Rings. One guy was playing Mr. House. It was just a dice rolling factory. So Cyclonic Rift would have been cool just to set him back to the Stone Age, but that guy wasn't looking to compete. Another guy was playing Omnath. He just got off to a wicked slow start, but he did have Depth Stage. But thanks to the Tomio the Moon Sage I run, I could just lock down the depths. Or I could just lock down the stage or the token. We're cool there. And with Snap and Capsize on lock and loop, I'm good to go. And the guy to my right was, I can't even remember. He was playing something. What's Abdella? Adbella, the white,
Abdella, yeah.
Abdella, the white creature that wanted ETB's exiles permanent. So when Abdella leaves, you return them all back. He was playing Abdella with a blue background, so that whenever Abdella left, for whatever reason, you drew cards. Like, these people were not ready to compete with Mana Drain and Cyclonic Rift. So the cards that we have been talking about have very much been outmodded and are now part of a brand new format of Commander, a brand new way to play Commander that has taken over the reins. And it is clear to see when you sit down and you engage with human beings at an appropriate level, and you see like what's going on at the table. You see that everything that we've discussed, everything that's on this Mox field list, is a class of card that has just been, I don't want to say claimed by cEDH, but pushed its way towards cEDH. So absolutely. Another thing we're seeing when we go over this is that cEDH is a driver. It is a financial driver. Before, we were looking at Commander on the whole, and we were saying, okay, what's good for Commander? You know, what's the next Panharmonicon they're making? Yeah. What's the next Crater of Behemoth they're making? What's the next Raga Draga? What's the next, X, Y, and Z? And you just go. Like, what has this broad-ass format appeal? And now you can finally step back, and you don't have to scour set lists now to say, what is the like, all right, cool. Are we playing Null Drifter in Commander, or are we playing it in cEDH? Not sure, but chances are probably not cEDH. Do I care about this card for Commander? I don't know. But if I want to keep, navigating this list for cEDH staples, maybe we're going to look at things like Volatile Stormdrake. A Gilded Drake alternative. We're going to look for cards like that. It's pretty easy to pick these cards out. It's a lot easier to operate in that space too, because the parameters are very well understood. It's got to be impactful and either free or really low on the curve.
Yeah, very efficient. That's the thing. It needs to be efficient.
Yep.
One of the other big ones, and this was kind of what we covered today, really. When we talked about like Mana Drain and stuff like that, is that there were definitely cards that saw eternal formats as financial drivers at one point.
Yeah.
Mana Drain, when Drain Tendrils was the storm deck before Paradoxical came out, which, whatever, Drain was driven by Vintage.
Yeah. Or
you saw
Slaver Control, because you had to cast a Slaver the first time, so Drain did it. Yeah.
Drain did it. When Metalworker Control was all over Legacy, Grim Monolith saw price floats because of Legacy.
Yep.
It has happened. But unfortunately, I don't even want to say it. Those formats are dying. Legacy is the best format, and I'm sorry to see you go, but that's the reality of it.
Yep.
And cEDH has kind of taken the all-stars of those Eternal formats and moved them into its wings and taken them on as, okay, we're going to be where you go to live financially. I think duels are kind of an exception. They may see some bumps from Legacy, mostly on the lower end with like plateaus, scrublands. I mean, even
the tag-alongs, yeah.
Yeah, the tag-alongs see a little bit of that as people get into it because, I run Burn because it's cheap. Well, let me run Boros Burn in Legacy because it's cheap.
Yep.
But by and large, duels have just been taken over entirely by EDH. But there's a lot of those Eternal staples, Mana Drain, Crypt, etc. cEDH is kind of what's taken those on now. That's clear. We don't have the events for it. You'll occasionally see a bump in some of those cards right before an Eternal weekend. That's normal, but it goes right back down afterwards. Mindbreak Trap last year was a prime example. That card was $100 in the 2 weeks leading up to Eternal weekend and cratered back down to $40 as soon as Eternal weekend was over. So I think that's, Eternal staples at this point is almost synonymous with cEDH staples in terms of financial value.
The only note I have on this that you didn't cover is that if I was going to expect an event to happen that would spike prices of Drain and Vampiric Tutor and some of those odds and ends, they would be specifically cards that are banned in Legacy, and they would have to get unbanned in Legacy for those prices to go up. Yes, it is a dying format, but at the end of the day, people that were playing Legacy most likely never owned Mono Drain anyway, and if that card was unbanned, you'd probably see
please unban Mono Drain in Legacy, please.
Conversely, things like Vampiric Tutor are a little different because, like I mentioned before, it's banned in Legacy, but I played it in Extended. So why do I have Vampiric Tutors? Because the card was good then, and I expected it, and it was good in Vintage, a format that I had access to and the ability to play. So I kept them. But not everybody is like that, and so there might be a little bit of a float, uncertain. Vamp is not in middle school or pre-modern. I think it's banned there as well. I could stand to be corrected on that. But there's stuff like that. That not relevant to what we're talking about, but like if Mind Twist were unbanned in Legacy, you would see float because of that too. But
God, I hope.
You are right. The financial drivers for a lot of the playable reserve list cards that we have talked about, and the majority of the non-reserve list cards that we talked about for that matter, are seeing float and push because of cEDH. And the more people that move into that format, or the more people that want to start engaging with Commander in a more meaningful, more aggressive is the wrong word, competitive, because that's the C stands for, are going to start buying even into the lower end of the format. They're going to start nibbling away again at Cyclonic Rifts and things like that. And they're the crux of this episode is a tweet that we will link from cEDH PT on Twitter, where they basically come out and say, WotC contacted us about being TOs. There is support for this format now. That is the impetus for these episodes. If WotC wants to do that and stores say no proxy events, well, people have to step back, rebuy some things, and you're going to see people again start to nibble at this format. We're going to see these price spikes from cEDH. It is the driver of a lot of this stuff. People just aren't buying Mox Diamonds because they feel like it.
Yeah, they're not. It's to play.
Yep. And then a lot of what we're seeing did seem to be tied to cryptocurrency BTC specifically. And when you dig in and you look at those price graphs, you look at the ebbs and flows, what we're really seeing is that there's not as much coincidence as we thought.
No.
I thought I was going to see a lot more, especially when I started this thought exercise, and I was like, oh, well, this kind of lines up and this lines up. And then I saw that drastic shift over to Ikoria with Commander at home. And yes, that does overlap with Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency was just doing its thing. The bubble was starting to form. people were kind of, I don't want to say minting their fortunes because that is wrong, but people were just moving in and out. They were swing trading through and coming back in. If you want to be more specific about when cryptocurrency kind of affects Magic, you need to look at the reserve list on the whole, and you need to look 4 times of years. Generally, Vegas was one of those where people would exit their position in May or like early summer, so they knew they were liquid. Then they would go to Vegas and blow the doors off, or CTAC. And Niagara was another one. Gen Con, it's another big one. You don't have to just look for the ebbs and flows of BTC. You need to actually look for what happens with events where people who can get liquid from crypto knew they could ball outrageous. And it's going to coincide with that. And that wasn't really what we were seeing when we overlaid the Bitcoin graphs in particular, especially once it starts to trend down and the reserve list and these cards keep going up or they rope. Like, well, obviously people aren't swinging back. They're just holding on to this stuff. But it's not like they just minted their fortune and swung in to begin with, because these graphs just didn't go straight vertical. They were organic. It happened over time. It wasn't like this quick in and out where people were pumping and dumping out of NFTs or crypto into Magic cards.
Yeah. If it was happening, it was happening with power. Whereas a lot of us, when this was happening, were thinking it was affecting this stuff too. And clearly, looking at the graphs and everything, it's just
power, rated cards, like ridiculous foils, stuff like that. Yeah, that's where we all expected it to happen, not down at the demonic tutor level, not down at the, like, it sounds weird to say, but like the Grim Monolith level.
Yeah.
It was happening more at the, like you said, the power level, time vault kind of stuff. People were looking for alpha beta, like slab
Arabian Nights, Antiquity, like the high-end stuff, like workshops, etc. Not.
Yep. All right. Picks, or do you have any more you want to wax poetic about?
I got nothing else but picks.
All right. We didn't talk about who was going first, but because your pick is relevant to the set that just dropped, I'm going to make you go first.
Yeah. Mine's an easy one. Don't be an idiot, stupid. Buy fetch lands now. So this is the second ever reprint of the Onslaught fetches in MH3. Delta, Strand, etc. They have had a price of 50 for a while because of the Cons reprint. If there's one thing we can count on, it's that worst case scenario, fetches will always be incredibly liquid. Over the next month or two, pay attention to the price on these cards because they will bottom out. It's going to happen. We just had pre-release. We're going to hit peak open. I guarantee you stores are going to run as many limited events for Modern Horizons 3 as they possibly can. There's no way they don't.
Inside baseball, do you know if you guys are going to be splitting OTJ and MH3 until we got Bloom Barrel?
Nope. All MH3.
There you go.
Why? Why would you do OTJ when you have MH3? And people are clamoring to pay $30 to $40 for a draft.
Yep. Our store basically had to say, like, we have to run one OTJ a week. We have to.
Yeah.
I don't know who's mandating it, but like the players all want MH3 all the time, and the store is just like, no, we have to do current set standard.
Some OTJ something. Yeah. It's this set is going to be opened into the ground. We have fetch lands. We have serialized cards on top of that. This will, I have every expectation, be the single most open set in the history of Magic. It may have as much opened as the next 2 sets below it. These cards will bottom out. These are the most important cards in the entire set because they see play in Modern, in Legacy, in Vintage, in EDH. They're a financial driver for EDH, which we just spent 3 weeks covering. There is no reason not to pay attention to these cards. And Delta right now is pre-selling at $16 before we even hit release. If we get a $10 polluted Delta, you need to buy every single one you can find. I know I've done some market callouts the past few weeks. This is the most important one you could possibly pay attention to. Buy as many of these fetch lands as you can.
Yep.
They're going to recover quickly, and they're going to be liquid forever. And that's literally it. I don't have much else because it's easy. This is the easiest thing in the world. Pay attention to the price. When it gets close to bottoming out or is bottomed out, buy as many as you can and sit on them until you want to sell them. That's it.
Yep. The Onslaught fetch lands are always going to be a little more unique than the Zendikar fetch lands because Zendikar fetch lands were in a main set, but we weren't in the new print run era, right? We didn't hit Rab yet. Where Con sits. But they were also reprinted, the Zen Fetchlands, in Modern Masters 2.
2.
And Modern Horizons 2 in multiple treatments. You had regular, full art, foil, retro foil, retro rainbow foil, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Onslaught Fetchlands were in standard main set. They were in cons, which is fantastic. And after that, that's it. They were reprinted in Modern Horizons 3. So because they were an Onslaught, the number of Onslaught fetches compared to Zendikar fetches always started from way far behind. The print run on Onslaught is going to be so much smaller than the print run of Zendikar. So you got to catch up somehow, and Modern Horizons 3 might finally be the time to do that. It might not. It all depends. I do believe this set is going to be very heavily opened, but for me, the question about population of these fetchlands is we lose stats on the number of cards printed after a while. I really don't know what the population of ONS fetches are, but I'm going to go ahead and say that I do believe that after this, we're not going to be at the same rate. So you're not going to see the struggle to recover financially on Onslaught fetches this time around you were seeing on the Zendikar fetches after the Modern Horizons 2 printing.
Yeah.
I do believe the Modern Horizons 3 fetchlands, the Onslaught ones, are going to recover better than their MH2 counterparts, just because they started so far behind, and even one standard set's printing did not really do enough to kind of shore up that population gap.
Yeah.
So I think that's also going to be part of it, and it's something that we need to just discuss as part of this cast, right? It was just, sure, Zendikar and Onslaught, both standard sets, but way different print quantities.
Yeah.
Zendikar also had the Hidden Treasures. What the hell is that thing called?
Yeah, it was the Hidden Treasures.
Yep. So people were just buying that set and cracking it into the ground because, WotC commissioned Starseed to buy everything they could. Power, duels, the candlesticks, it was all in there.
Workshops, forces, all of it.
So people, the chance of cracking a pack of Zendikar and finding a piece of power definitely pushed people to buy into that set. So, that set sold real well. It still does. For me, I'm sticking with Commander, and I'm looking at a big goofy dragon this week in Cavern Horde Dragon from...
This card's great.
Yeah. From LTC, Lord of the Rings Commander. It is 7 and 2 red for a 6/6 flying, trample, haste. The keywords are squarely in the middle of the card, so it's hard to see. The spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. So if one opponent controls 3 and another 5, then this costs 5 colorless less. Then, whenever Cavern Horde Dragon deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. So whomever you hit with Cavern Horde Dragon, for each artifact they control, you make a treasure token. And this card, well, I brought the stocks graph up. It ropes for a while. It dips a little bit because dragons aren't popular coming out of Ixalan. It's all about the merfolk and other odds and ends. We get OTJ, and we're finally starting to see some recovery, which is why we're coming back around to this now. Now, when I took my notes a month ago, CK was buying 52 at $8.50, and they were selling 9 at $15. Today, they are buying 43 at $8, and I don't have retail numbers, but if I had to guess, they're probably going to be selling at about the same pace. This is not a card that they sell through that often, it looks like. So, cool. We're just a small percentage under there. TCG Player, there were 51 listings with a market of $12.72 for LP or better. There are currently 55 listings with a market price of $12.59. So we're basically just seeing a little bit of stagnation in both places. And honestly, that's to be expected with Modern Horizons 3 coming out.
Yeah.
Day of info, I added this to my list at the beginning of April of this year. CK was buying 70 at, it looks like $6, and they had 8 for $11 on retail, and there were 96 copies on TCG Player for $9. So we're seeing that this card is increasing in price over time. We've just hit a little bit of stagnation, which again I believe is fine. We haven't hit a set that does a lot with dragons. There we've hit a lot of treasure making stuff, but because Cavern Horde Dragon doesn't do much besides make treasures, it's a little well, what are we going to do here with all this treasure? It's just yet another maker in the space or a big dragon. And that's basically the commander playability data that I've noted.
Yep.
It's a big mono red would be where you're playing this. That's kind of the deck you're jamming, just big mono red, or dragon aggro, or dragro, whatever you want, right?
Dragro, love it.
Yep, that's what the self-selecting number of people that submit to EDH Rec basically show that. There's really not a lot going on this card. It's pretty straightforward. It's one of those two themes. So it does kind of sit in this interesting Venn diagram, though, based on what we're seeing on EDH Rec. On the one side, there's the obvious dragon typal deck. This is, a big, like Cavern Dragon, a big dragon with 3 relevant keywords, flying, trample, and haste. That can come down ahead of curve because of that kind of pseudo affinity, and that thus it is a great threat early or late, and it kind of enables you to cascade into more threats by way of making treasures the turn it comes into play, maybe a little more reliably than Ancient Copper Dragon, who's to say.
Yep.
On the other side of the Venn diagram, this card can create a large number of treasures, often early attack, to help you go over the top of one or multiple opponents quickly. It can help you recover after a board wipe by just banking the treasures, or it can threaten any number of game-ending lines pretty quickly after you make the treasure trade. So that's kind of our Venn diagram. And then right in the middle is the desire to just cast more threats faster and try to win the game with speed, first, and then resiliency later. And the method by which you win doesn't really matter after that. You just want to make sure you
just
can
win.
do it. Yeah, exactly. So it's this kind of like neat little Venn diagram. Obviously not a circle, because the people who want to make treasures and the people who play dragons aren't always the same, but it's pretty close. So this does check a few boxes for casual appeal, notably the dragon type and the growing interest in treasures. But beyond that, it's kind of a bland card, honestly. It's a cog in the machine and isn't going to be sought after by all the red players, just a few that are interested in what the card does overall. It's by no means a staple, but it's also not a slouch. It's just something a bit more specific, but with a decently broad appeal. You can consider this like an artifact, and like artifacts matter kind of card too, because it just kind of shotguns some artifacts onto the table with no real restrictions. Just opponent has artifacts, let me at them. And that's what it's doing. It is just very overt in what it's trying to do. So it doesn't have this kind of cool, like, this is an awesome dragon and it does dragony things. Like, yeah, dragons and treasure, we get it. Like, I get it. It ain't making me laugh, but I get it. Yeah. But like from a format perspective, it's kind of what it does. It just does everything that you want, a little efficiency, but not everything you need it to. Like I said, it's not a big dumb dragon that does big dumb dragon things. It's just a big dumb dragon that does artifact and treasure things. But those artifacts and treasure things can make more big dumb dragons. So it's
they sure can.
That's what I mean when it's a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
It's not a standout. It just does. It has a job and it does the job. And like sometimes you just need a jobber. Like, yeah, that's it. Like, cool, I guess.
It's big and makes you go a little bit faster.
Yeah, which is sometimes all you need. And so that is why you see this in dragon typal decks. It's why we see similar cards in angel typal decks, like cards that just reduce the mana value of angels or allow you to bank resources so you can better cast the next bunch of angels. It's the same thing. Like, this is the same kind of like appeal that people have in both directions for that tribe and this one. Overall on the timeline, we're seeing this sell about 10 copies a day between near mint and LP, with a bit of a sawtooth market price heading into this episode, as individuals list their single copies at TCG low to move them. And that's why there are now 55 listings instead of 51. People are just entering the market at the bottom, and that's it. The floor, however, on this card does continue to rise as it sawtooths, which is pretty cool. Now, the one thing to note is the Gaming Co. has 258 of these at $13.28. They've actually raised that price. They now have 238 of them at $14.89. So they sold 50 copies and then raised the price by over $2 or by $1.50. That's awesome for us. When I wrote this note, their anchor was $1.50 cheaper, right? Their anchor was $1.50 cheaper. I said once their anchor is gone, this is going to be a $15 card immediately and almost $20 before the next 100 copies sell. Since they moved their anchor up, they're just moving the price of this card up and up and up and up. So this is not going to be a $15 card when this anchor goes. It might actually be a $17 to $20 card when this anchor goes, and then it becomes a $25 card really quickly before the next 100 sell. I like what's going on with this card, and the price is actually really funny now that I look at this. But at this rate, turning them back around into the open market in about a month and a half should be an almost 100% profit margin. And that just stands. You can just literally buy the ones off low right now. You could probably buy like 40 copies off low and relist them at or just a little bit above the Gaming Co. and turn a profit on them, like 20% profit on all those copies at a minimum to the Gaming Co. and call it a day. Reprint equity overall. When I picked this back in April, the idea of creating treasures under your opponent's control wasn't, this is going to be weird, so stick with me. Creating treasures under your opponent's control wasn't a thing. And then Generous Plunderer was printed in the big score. Now, again, like I said, this is a bit of an odd duck, but this does worry me a bit. WotC seems to not design around the number of treasures your opponents might have. They look at artifacts, like think like Hellkite Tyrant. But we might now be in a new paradigm where creating artifacts, i.e. treasures under your opponent's control, could be a commander deck theme, which puts a bit of pressure on this card and the likes of Hellkite Tyrant for a reprint. Like it kind of seeds the idea of that. It does seem a bit far-fetched overall, but I think it might be a real concern if this trend does continue. All right, so that was my tinfoil hat theory on where we could possibly see a reprint. It involves a WotC leaning into creating artifacts or treasures under your opponent's control, thanks to cards like Generous Plunderer. Outside of that, I really don't think we're going to see Cavern Horde Dragon get upcycled. It's not odd. They just have better cards dedicated to the theme, like Hellkite Tyrant, the card I keep mentioning here. Thus, I think we're kind of safe on this. It being from Lord of the Rings that really doesn't play into the reprint equity because it's just a generic dragon. There's nothing Lord of the Rings about Cavern Horde Dragon. It can go anywhere. It's not a named card place, etc. But it is what it is. By quantity, I didn't really buy into this at all, so I don't own any of these. It's not necessarily something I need in my Karthus deck. I do my ramping the hard way with green spells, because I'm afforded it, and because Cavern Horde doesn't lean into what I want to be doing in that deck, I wouldn't pick any up for that. But if I was going to play like Myrim, the Teamer dragon that makes copies of dragons, I could see myself playing this here either alongside or instead of Ancient Copper Dragon for more reliable treasure making. And if I did that, then I would start picking these copies up because I would believe in this card as a playable overall. Not to say that I don't, and I wouldn't pick this up to spec on because of that, but because I have no vested interest in playing this card. I have not picked any up for play, which is usually what I do first before I pick these up for speculation. And as my money is currently tied up in getting MH3 playables, I have not really had enough to set aside for a $13 card overall. That said, outside of the one or two playables that I would have if I was playing it, I'd probably like to have about a play set and just turn these back on, or back through rather, TCG Player. Sales velo is low enough where I feel like I'll sell those copies in a couple of days, but I just don't want to mire myself with this card. Sales velo isn't low, but I don't want to go so tall on something that is, I said it before, bland in regards to what it does, because it is a cog in the machine. It just makes the engine go. I don't like spending a lot of money on these types of cards, so I would just pick up about 4 extra from my playables when I get the time.
I think this card's great because it is so innocuous. Yeah. Because it just is a cog in the dragon wheel. It's a cog in the treasure wheel. It's not quite plane specific, but like the Horde thing was Smog. Yes. It was Lord of the Rings was what created that myth. But I love that it is such, I don't even know if it's an efficient cog, but it's a cog that you recognize because, oh, this is a big dumb dragon that lets me cast big dumb dragons faster.
Yeah.
And also, maybe eventually there's more stuff with treasures where, it's not just one card with X treasures you win. There's other things to do with it, or, Hellkite Tyrant, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it's great.
Me too. And the other thing this card does is if you've never played against Dockside Extortionists before, the first one happens without a problem. The second one creates this weird situation. It's a little bit of a sticky wicket. The third one kind of turns the tables into just this standoff of who's popping what treasures just to make sure the Dockside, the third Dockside, doesn't do anything. Yeah. And when you're dealing with a lot of treasures at a table, Cavern Horde can also put a weird squeeze on a game like that. And it's not a game mode, so it's hard to kind of say on like why people would play this card in the above sections that I went through. Like, that's a reason, but in all honesty, it does kind of create that kind of a game state, which is you pick the person with a lot of treasures, and if they don't want to do anything with those treasures, you get a lot of them. But you can make them think real hard about that.
Very.
So I think that's kind of a hidden mode on this card, more so than like changing the context of the game overall.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't expect this card to stay this cheap for that long based on everything that it can do. So that's going to be my pick for the week. Anything about cEDH before we cut out?
Nope.
All right. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are
at Damon_Thurston.
We'll see you next week.